also to do things, Ellie, that one would think are career-ending. The way he desecrated Arlington National Cemetery would be career-ending for a normal politician. His constant lies. But even this piece about saying, well, my building was the tallest until, they brought down the World Trade Center. Now it's the second tallest. I mean, everything he does is despicable.
The reason why it doesn't end his career is because his supporters are just as despicable. All right. Like Trump's whole thing, he's a narcissist, right? And so his whole thing is to have a complete lack of compassion and empathy for everybody else. It's all about him. That's why he lies about 9/11. It's all about him, me. He's probably the least compassionate president we've had in 200 years since Andrew Jackson. And it works for him because his supporters are just as ungenerous and have just as little compassion and empathy for others. So when he is seen out there, essentially, as you guys have put it, desecrating our national symbols, when he is seen out there putting himself above all else, his supporters also want that to be the case. They want to do that in their own lives. That's how they think of themselves. And that's why it never hurts Trump when he takes these crass and classless actions. It's because his supporters think that being crass and classless is actually kind of cool.
Yeah, and they also, he hates the people they hate. So when he makes up this idea that these Muslims in New Jersey were cheering, and there are Americans in New Jersey cheering supposedly for the towers to come down, he's like, well, yeah, because my supporters don't like them, right? The same way that
and then this is the precursor.
So that's the clip. I think we all saw it yesterday, the MSNBC Despicable clip. And there's just so much. As soon as I saw it, I knew I wanted to come on and talk about it because there's just so much packed into this, and there's a couple of potential rabbit holes to go down, and maybe we will go down them as we move along here this morning. But I think the question to start off the conversation is, what are the consequences for this? And what I don't mean like punitive, like retaliatory. I mean to our society, to our culture. What are the consequences of having a culture, a mainstream culture, where it's considered appropriate to go on a national cable news channel and have a panel of people platformed who are calling half the country despicable? There's a separate conversation to be had about like the wisdom of this tactic, because it didn't work out too well for Hillary Clinton in 2016 when she called us all deplorables. That backfired quite a bit. I guess t-shirt companies are going to be happy because they got a new word to put on pro-Trump t-shirts. Despicables, or Despicable Me, I saw trending yesterday. So in that regard, I guess it's a boon to a certain niche of the economy. But this idea, and I go back to the debate on Tuesday night, where Kamala Harris had this one particular moment, and I wish I should have clipped it and had it ready to go so I could play it to put it in context for you, or to give you the context, where she was talking about race and inferring or implying the racism of Donald Trump, and talking about how she, on the other hand, she's all about unity. She's all about neighborliness. She's all about us all coming together and being one big happy family. She doesn't have any divisive intention whatsoever. When we know she's a purveyor of critical race theory, we know that she subscribes to the gospel of the left, which is that America is inherently racist. It was born in racism. It was birthed in slavery, and is fundamentally flawed, and that we all need to go do the work of anti-racism. By the way, Matt Walsh's movie, Am I Racist?, comes out today in the movie theater. Probably worth a go. I probably will later today. But I mean, we know that that's where the left is coming from, right? But even setting that aside, if in the context, like if you want to sell that, like if you really think that the American people are going to buy this shtick that you guys are the ones that are for unity and neighborliness and coming together and being one big happy nation, you probably shouldn't go on TV a couple of days later or the next day and have a panel of people saying that half the country is despicable, that Donald Trump's despicable and that his supporters are despicable and that they're crass and classless and that we're not compassionate and what have you. And of course, every single one of those claims going down the line is incorrect. Every single one of them. I especially like this use of the word compassion because this has been a pet peeve of mine for some time, and I imagine it will remain so for probably my entire life. This selective appeal to compassion. Because you know who they don't have compassion for? Well, obviously us, right? They're calling us despicable. Which despicable, what is the root word there? Despise. What does it mean to despise someone? It means that at the very least, like the best possible, the most generous interpretation of despising a person is maybe apathy. I don't think apathy is an effective synonym for it because it goes beyond apathy. It's an actual feeling. It's an emotion. It's like a revulsion. It's like the person that you're dealing with is garbage. So what kind of a person, because I do think there are in fact despicable people. That's absolutely true. But what type of a person would you categorize as being despicable? I mean, for me, that would be something like a murderer, a rapist, somebody who's going around carjacking, um, somebody who burns down a city, right? Like those are despicable actions conducted by despicable people. But somebody who you disagree with politically, to call them despicable, certainly that's not somebody who you don't have. I think one fair way to define despise is the opposite of compassion. So on the one hand, they're accusing us of not having compassion. On the other hand, they are describing us as despicable, which is ironically them expressing the fact that they have no compassion for us. Because it's not possible to have compassion for somebody who you find despicable. But then also just this claim that they're the ones who have the monopoly on compassion, and we somehow operate at a compassion deficit. It's precisely the opposite. And I would argue that our side of the ideological aisle is the one that actually has the monopoly on compassion. We're the ones who actually aren't thinking about just ourselves. We have a future orientation. We're thinking about the future. We're thinking about our kids. And indeed, we're thinking about our neighbor. We apply accurately the biblical maxim to treat your neighbor or to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Well, how do I love myself? Well, I feed myself, right? With my work, right? I do the work that I need to do in order to keep my life in order. And what do I expect from others? To not have my rights violated. And so when I love my neighbor in the way that I love myself, that doesn't mean that I go over to his house and feed him as a regular course of daily business, like that, like it becomes my responsibility to uphold his life. No. What it means is that, amongst other things, I grant him the respect and the dignity of having the expectation that he's going to take care of his own business. And I respect him by not violating his property, his life, by not going over to his house and taking his stuff, by not trespassing, by not encroaching, by upholding his rights. And you know what that requires? A general compassion for all people. I don't think you can claim to be compassionate when you turn a blind eye towards crime and blame society instead of the perpetrator for engaging in it. I don't think you can claim to be compassionate when you look at Springfield, Ohio, and you immediately go to try to discredit the claims of the people who are on the ground telling you what is happening in their own neighborhoods. And you place all the focus on internet memes rather than the reality of 20,000 people having been dropped in a town of 60,000 and all of the clearly negative impacts that that has on a community. That is not a compassionate viewpoint. And yet that's the viewpoint of the left. I guarantee you, that's the viewpoint of every single one of these MSNBC panelists, is that there's something wrong with the people in Springfield, Ohio, because they didn't just welcome with open arms 20,000 Haitian immigrants. Now you'll notice we're not talking about Martha's Vineyard here. We're not talking about the Upper East Side or Upper West Side. I'm not from New York, so I don't know. It's not where these people on MSNBC live. That's not where the 20,000 Haitian immigrants were dropped. It was on an already poor community in Springfield, Ohio, far from the view, far from the vision of anyone who's going to be hosted or platformed on MSNBC or inconvenienced on their way into the studio. They're never going to have to deal with it. So they get to sit from afar in their ivory tower and look down upon the folks in Springfield, Ohio, and declare us as Trump supporters and Donald Trump himself as despicable for having the audacity to actually care about those people. They say we're not compassionate, but we're the ones who care about the citizens and the residents of Springfield, Ohio, while they clearly do not. It's absolutely maddening. And if you want to respond to this or join in, feel free to request to speak, and I will bring you up. What was one of the other points I wanted to make about this? Crass and classless, they call us. I mean, I think that was a pretty good description of the clip itself. Pretty crass, pretty classless, lying about people, and just the audacity of calling half the country despicable. Half, which just objectively, they've seen the polling, they know it's right around 50%. So this is your play. And I want to go back to the question of intentions and consequences. Like, what type of a world are they inviting with this type of rhetoric? It's the type of thing that you hear them ask questions. I've had people accuse me of potentially inciting violence because I speak in harsh terms regarding the demand upon my conscience to denounce my most fundamental and sacred beliefs in an area like gender ideology, for instance. They'll say, oh, you say that somebody could get angry. Okay. Well, what do you think's going to happen when you go to your rabid supporters and you tell them everybody over there on the other side is despicable? Everyone over there on the other side is worthy of despise. What do you do to people that you despise? How do you treat people that you despise? If, in fact, this claim is true, and we have a situation whereby, sorry, just letting up a speaker there. If we have a situation whereby we're going to proceed as if half the country is in fact despicable, what kind of public policy does that justify? And I think we already know the answer to a large degree because we've seen it proposed. This conversation about free speech, the comments that have been made by Tim Walz and Kamala Harris, indicating that they would use every tool at their disposal to crack down on whatever they define to be misinformation, including almost assuredly anything I post, anything you post. X is a platform. You had our Attorney General here in Minnesota, Keith Ellison, come out the night that Brazil Supreme Court doubled down on the banning of the X platform and thank them for doing it. Now, in a world where you have compassion for your fellow man, in a world where you're not crass or classless, in a world where you're not putting yourself above everyone else, you would abide by the spirit and intention of the First Amendment, which is also enshrined in the Article 1 of our state constitution here in Minnesota, which guarantees the inviolable right to freedom of expression and free speech. That'd be where you're coming from if you actually value your fellow human beings, if you don't despise them. But if in fact you despise them, which is what MSNBC is telling us they do. They despise us. Well, then you can justify, if we're despicable, then you can justify saying, well, the things that they say don't fall into the category of protected speech because they are despicable. They are beneath us. They are below. And it's extremely grating for them to place within these comments. And it's only a minute and a half clip, or a clip that's a minute and a half. And yet there's just so much horrific substance and contradictory points stuffed within it. One of them is the accusation that Trump is always putting himself above everyone else, and that we as his supporters are putting ourselves above others. But it's exactly the reverse. That's what they're doing in this clip. When you say that an entire category of people, all of your political opposition, is despicable, worthy of despise, then you have very clearly placed yourself above that opposition, above that other side. They see themselves as being in a different category of human being than the rest of us. And when you get there, this is the dehumanization concept, the dehumanization stage prior to or in support of mass persecution. You have to go through this step of dehumanizing the group of people who you want to persecute. Otherwise, it's not going to fly. Otherwise, people might object. But if you've decided in your own mind, or if you have established in the culture that there's a certain group of people that don't deserve to be protected, if that applies to free speech, what else does it apply to? Does it apply to your property? Does it apply to your liberty? Does it apply to your autonomy? How many rights that have generally been understood to apply to every citizen of the United States and every human being within American jurisdiction and the jurisdiction of the several states, how many of those rights are we going to, in their mind, justifiably curtail because the person or people who we're doing it against are despicable? That's where I see this heading. And we've already obviously seen many, many examples of them applying that kind of double standard to sort of subjectively and arbitrarily declare their opponents unworthy of basic human rights and dignity. Big Al, did you have anything? I'm guessing not. Well, I appreciate it. We could talk a little bit about their claim that he desecrated Arlington Cemetery. I mean, my Lord, how absurd can you possibly get? He visited Arlington Cemetery at the invitation of Gold Star families, and somebody took pictures. So wait, so if you got to understand, you got to explain to me how this logic works. Like, what's the nexus of circumstances that makes that a desecration? Is it because he's a former president? Is it because he's a Republican? Is it because his name is Donald Trump? Is that what makes it a desecration? Because we know for a fact that former presidents, current presidents, and public officials of all kind have all gone to Arlington Cemetery. And many of them have had their pictures taken there. In fact, Joe Biden had images of Arlington Cemetery in his own political campaign ads. Was that a desecration? And if it wasn't, what's the difference? What made it not a desecration as opposed to Trump accepting the invite of Gold Star families? Is it because his name's Joe Biden? Is it because he's a Democrat? Is that why? Is it because you like him? Is he the one? He gets to do it? Is that why? It's just so transparently obvious what they're doing here, but maddening nonetheless. And I think that what we need to do is exactly what we're doing here this morning, is pushing back against it, calling it out, and never, ever yielding to it, never, ever getting defensive about any of these claims. productive mockery, not reckless mockery, but productive mockery of just their audacity and the character deficits that are on display. And I think also pointing out, like, not making the same mistake that they're making, right? So when I talk about the left, I'm talking about an ideology and those who are actively perpetuating and furthering that ideology. I try to use that phrase, the left, as opposed to generalizing about Democrats per se, or certainly saying something like they just said. Like, can you imagine? I mean, I don't think Trump has said anything like this. That, like, there is no comparable inverse of this where you've had somebody who was analyzing uh, something that Kamala had done or said, and calling her despicable, and then applying that, superimposing that upon literally everybody who supports her. I mean, it's just not something you see. Yeah, we throw elbows. We engage in tough rhetoric and tough criticisms. But this idea of saying that the people who we're against are less than human and therefore should be treated differently, that is not a position that any conservative holds. Like, in spite of my regard for the left as a project, as being a despicable project, that doesn't mean that my desire or intention is to treat the people who engage with it any differently than I would treat any other human being. I have a universal standard. When I talk about holding criminals accountable, I don't care who those criminals are voting for or who they provide political support to. There's one standard. Did you do it or did you not? The standard is basis in fact, findings of fact, letter of law. Whereas on their side, they very explicitly argue against that type of methodology. They argue against objectivity. They argue against limiting judicial interpretations to the facts. They argue against the blindfold that is worn by Lady Liberty in all the statues. They want her to pull that blindfold up and peek and see who she's looking at so that she can decide. Because when she sees who she's looking at, then she could decide who's right and who's wrong. Not based upon the scales in her other hand, not based upon how it all balances out, but based upon who the person is. That sounds like putting yourself above others to me. That sounds like being crass and classless to me. That sounds like a lack of compassion to me. But I don't know. What do I know? You got something, Big Al? I thought I heard you there.
I do. I'm sorry, I was muted. I'm so used to keeping it muted until it's time to talk. I couldn't get to the button fast enough.
Sure.
So yeah, I was talking about the classless left. I'm now trending on Yahoo, MSN, UK, Mail UK. There's, I don't know, 20 or 30 articles that are now been written about my bar because I put up a Trump sign. I had to pull my phone out of the wall 2 nights ago, call the sheriff about the death threats, the bomb threats, the threats to burn the bar down, the just complete intolerance, the comments on I had to shut my Facebook comments off. I've spent the last 2.5 days fighting Google reviews and Yelp reviews that are just awful. It's on Reddit now, the calls to destroy my business online and in person. And the things that have been said to me, I mean, if you take a look at some of the posts on my X account and my pinned post, you'll see all I did was start a GoFundMe asking to help fund this because we lost a ton of business when I put that billboard up. And the horrible things that these people will say is there's no boundary. There are no boundaries. They do not care. Inclusion and kindness and compassion is not the left. That's just not them. They're the party of violence and hatred. I'm convinced.
I mean, it's pretty hard to argue with that, right? First of all, it's horrifying to learn that that's the experience that you've been going through. And let's connect offline, so I can see what, if anything, there is I can do to kind of add.
Yeah, Ben Davis stepped up. He actually called me and rented space on my digital billboard.
Yeah,
through his campaign.
Sure.
And he said, put me right after Trump. And I said, you got it. On a 30-foot pole, on a
right.
4x10 double-sided digital billboard on the side of Highway 6, you're right there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and we've seen this though. This is not like a one-off deal, and it goes
cancel.
Yep. Well, and it goes back to what I was saying before, which is that there are consequences. There are cultural, real world, tangible, physical consequences to perpetuating the idea that your political opponents are subhuman, that your political opponents are not worthy of basic human dignity and respect. And on the flip side, you want to know what's truly astounding is that I've had points of order called on me on the House floor of the Minnesota House of Representatives, accusing me of being disrespectful and harassing people. Why? Because I refused to do the pronoun nonsense and because I refused to give any quarter to the absurd premises wrapped up in gender identity.
Because you have to back down.
That's it. That's
and when that's the rules.
Yep.
Walter.
And when you refuse to, when you say no, you may not have my mind. That's not yours. You can't have it. I'm not going to let you. When you take that stance, then they go to first of all, they categorize it as harassment and hate. How do they categorize what they're doing to you? Because to me, that's harassment and hate. Harassment is so many phone calls and death threats that you have to literally physically take your phone out of the wall. Hate is threatening to burn your business down and engaging in death threats. That's hate. All I did was say,
the whopper for me, Walter, the one that really did it, the one that sent me over the edge, was a woman who called me and wished rape on my bartenders. I hope your bartenders get raped. You support a rapist, and that's what you all deserve. And I lost it. It actually made me cry. I had a little mini breakdown. I couldn't believe that a woman would take the time to look for my phone number and call me and say such horrible things.
I sincerely believe that in every time and place, there are always going to be certain people who, for whatever reason, have the dysfunction of wanting to be able to engage in the type of behavior that you're experiencing right now, who get off on calling them for business and threatening the employees, wishing rape and death upon people, and being able to, talking about burning places down and vandalizing and all that. There's a certain group of people that very obviously, very clearly, by virtue of the fact that they're doing it, enjoy it and seek out opportunities to do it. And I think that those folks, there's a different, it very much depends, whatever the culture of the moment is, they're going to find the segment of that culture where they can get away with behaving in that way. So for instance, if we were back in like the Salem witch trial these days, they're going to find the way to be on the side. They might not care about witchcraft at all. It might not be it's not an ideological thing. It's a character defect in their soul where they have to find the way to be able to get away with treating people poorly. And I think that's where a lot of the support for the woke stuff comes from, is because in your day-to-day life, you can't behave that way. Like, you can't walk into your job and start threatening people and harassing them and engaging in, it's illegal behavior for one, but then just at a social level, you're going to get fired. Nobody's going to like you. You're going to face social consequences, some form of social censure. But what the woke community has provided is a context in which if you can check certain boxes, then it's okay. So if the person you're dealing with is somebody who's a white, straight, Christian, as they put it, cisgender, although I hate to use that term because it's an invented nonsense. If they check all those boxes, you can mock them to your heart's content. You could treat them like they're nothing. You can blame them for all the problems, ills, for all the world's ills. You can treat them differently, subject them to different expectations of how they're supposed to behave in society, ostracize them, castigate them. And certainly, if anybody of any color or sex or socioeconomic disposition says anything, like crosses certain ideological red lines that they have set up. So, for instance, again, me saying I'm not playing the gender game. It's stupid. And I'm not going to do it. That crosses an ideological red line, which empowers them in their mind. It empowers them and gives them permission to treat me like I'm less than human, to treat me like I don't have the right to free speech, to treat me like I don't have any business being wherever I'm at. And this is what's coming for all of us if we don't call it out. I think it is the overriding phenomenon that we're witnessing in the current moment, which is the breakdown of the classical liberal order. The idea of e pluribus unum and the notion of live and let live, and the thing that enables a Christian to live in a house right next to a Jew, which is in a house right next to a Muslim. The reason why we can make that work in the United States of America and have made that work just fine is because of this classical liberal order, which has the expectation there are certain rules of civility that apply not just in our common law and our statutory law, but also just in our cultural fabric. And one of those ideas is it is okay for your God to not be my God. It is okay for your opinion to not be my opinion. And we will argue that out and figure it out like two human beings who respect each other's rights. And instead, the new rules, as are being deployed against Big Al, as are being deployed against anybody who crosses certain red lines, is that no, you don't get to have your God. You're going to worship ours. And if you do what Big Al's doing, if you have that Daniel moment of going up to your room on the highest floor and tossing open your windows and praying to your God 3 times a day, as was your custom prior, then they're going to throw you in the lion's den. To me, that's despicable. To me, that's crass and classless. To me, that's putting yourself above others when you think that your God is more important than their God. In the sense of, because listen, we all think that in the context of our faith, but I'm talking about that somebody else not believing in your God means that you get to treat them differently than you expect to be treated. And that's where we're at. Instead of like a theological inquisition, we're now dealing with an ideological inquisition, where if you do not fall in line, you're going to suffer the same types of persecutions as previous historical theological inquisitions imposed. And I can't even say that's where we're going. That's where we are.
Walter, can I jump in for a quick?
Yep, go right ahead.
So I just want to piggyback off of Big Al, and I 100% agree with you that what's happened to his business. Obviously yourself, Walter, and how you're treated in the house and everything else is absolutely despicable, right? And I just want to call out that you don't see it. I mean, you see it in the house, you see it, all over Minnesota, but you see it in businesses. It doesn't stop there. I see it in our own neighborhood. I put up 2 or 3 Trump signs, small, 12-inch by whatever they are, 12 by 18 Trump signs behind my house. And since then, we get anonymous letters from neighbors saying that, we don't belong here, that it's against HOA rules. You can't have those signs up, but everyone else has signs up. So why is it just me that I can't have mine up? I see it even with my kids. There's a number of neighborhood kids that absolutely refuse to play with my kids because inside my garage, not publicly seen, not anything else, but inside my garage, I have a Trump 2024 flag hanging there. And, my kids come inside, crying because they don't have anyone to play with. So it doesn't happen just at like the business level. Yeah. It's affecting our kids. It's affecting our neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. And like you said, that treatment of others is absolutely despicable. I don't care how you vote. I don't care. We can be completely at opposite ends of the spectrum, but every single time that we have a neighborhood block party, my kids, my family are the first ones out there shaking hands, serving ice cream, putting movies on for the neighborhood kids. And you're treated as second class as soon as you put an opposing view sign up. Mm-hmm. So mm-hmm. It just doesn't stop at the business level. And what happened, Big Al, absolutely is. I mean, it's a travesty, right? Yep. But now you start involving my kids in this. Yeah. From other kids. This isn't stuff that kids need to be learning at that age, right? My kids are 11 and 8, and they're treated as second class, because of what I think. And for a fact their kids were taught that by their parents. Oh, of 100%. Course. I don't talk politics in front of my kids. I don't have the news on in front of my kids. It's let's go outside and throw a football or play catch or something like that. And it sucks because you have to deal with it at the home front now.
I appreciate you sharing that story and that experience, and it really does combine with what Big L had to say, kind of round out the experience of what we see happening, this stratification of our culture and our society rooted in tribal differences over political ideology or racial theory or whatever the woke focus of the day is. And the other thing that I notice about this is you rarely, if ever, get any sort of substantive explanation justifying the despise that you are receiving. So I was at an event a couple of nights ago, and I had this gal, and it's kind of similar. Like within a couple of minutes, I had a version of the experience that you're describing with your kids, where your kids are out there playing, and everything's on the up and up. It's good. Their kids like each other. They're having fun. They're enjoying their time together. But all of a sudden, they see the Trump flag, and now all that's out the window. Like none of the prior relationship, none of the established rapport can carry past this point. It's like once you show me the evil talisman that indicates you're part of the wrong tribe, now I have to disown you, I have to shame you, I have to avoid you. And I had that same experience within the context of just a few minutes in dealing with this gal who, we're chatting and we're getting along and everything's fine. And then all of a sudden, me supporting Donald Trump came into the conversation somehow. I think she might have explicitly asked it, like, do you support Donald Trump? Which, yes, I do. But it's weird to me that in the course of a conversation, that's something that you're going to bring up. But okay, fine. And then past that point, it was like a total U-turn. It was like, why? Well, that's terrible. He's so, and you're like, okay, Can you tell me why? And that's what you get, is just like a bunch of scoffing, as if scoffing were an argument. And I honestly don't think that a lot of these folks, if you really pin them down, could tell you why. And when you look at that MSNBC clip, they don't give you a why. They just declare that Donald Trump is despicable. And they declare that his supporters are also despicable. And they declare that we're not compassionate. And they declare that we put ourselves above others. They don't show it. They don't take us through how any of those claims might possibly be true. Now, we've done that here this morning, gone through all the ways in which the claims that they're making are ridiculous and all the ways in which they can quite easily be inverted. And you guys have shared your personal stories indicating that, and so have I. So, I mean, that's the difference. Is I can, when I present an argument and I offer a premise and a conclusion, in between those two things is this stuff called supporting evidence, right? Like the facts that build the case to the conclusion. With the left, sometimes you don't even get either the premise or the supporting evidence. You just get the conclusion stated as gospel,
You get feelings.
to not be challenged. But at most, you'll get the premise and the conclusion, but no supporting evidence. And I think that's what we saw in the MSNBC clip. 19, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Walter. This isn't new. Ever since I, followed Rush Limbaugh, when he began, all the way up to date, battling the school board, battling in the schools for my kids to, be conservative and to believe in our values here in the United States. This isn't new. So I think, we just got to keep fighting. We got to keep punching. And, one of the sources of all this, has to be the education system in Minnesota. I mean, if you go by the premise of following the money, 46% of all of our tax dollars go towards education. We're spending right now about $15 billion a year on education that goes through, early childhood development through 12th grade and then MINSCU. And I got to believe that a lot of the, ideology, a lot of the, pronouns and a lot of the attacks, Walter, that you're getting, in your job now as a House of Representatives, comes from that left-leaning education system that seems to be now lately at the center of all of the fraud and all of the grooming and all of the changes that seem to be escalating in this state. And I'd like your opinion on that.
Can you restate the premise? So that what I'm gleaning is that the education system is a causal factor in the fraud and abuse that we've seen as of late. Did I catch it?
Alicia?
Sorry about that.
He's on mute.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yes, I was muted. And anyway, so can you restate the question? Because I'm not sure I caught the whole premise.
Well, again, I think the source of the problems that we're talking about, the left and what's going on in our state when it comes to, being attacked, whether it's your kid or whether it's your business or whether, it's your values, is coming from that education group.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought you had framed it as.
Yeah.
Okay. So
when we're spending $15 billion a year, or 46% of our biennium budget goes to that group, they seem to be lately a big source of the problems. When you look at feeding our future, when you look at, the grooming, when you look at, changing our bathrooms to boys having tampons in there. They seem to be the guys, the group that is driving a lot of this, and have been my entire life as a parent, battling the education system for the right for my kids to be left alone and just teach them.
I think there are, I don't think, I know that there are a lot of people, including in areas and communities that you would not expect, that feel the exact same way. In fact, I have reason to believe, and it's not just a hunch, that school choice and giving parents an option, and giving communities options, through actually putting the independent back in independent school district, and empowering communities to actually transmit their culture and transmit their values and set the moral standards for their communities, their families. That's a huge issue for a lot of people who currently aren't voting because they don't feel like it matters. They don't feel like they're ever going to get anything good out of it. But if you start a conversation about school choice, they're going to perk up for exactly the reason that you're talking about. There's a clip that comes to mind that I saw this morning. Somebody posted, it was one of these fight clips, where like at a school, it was a girl minding her own business, walking with a backpack outside the school, and she gets jumped by a boy, and from behind, and he tries to tackle her and wrestle her to the ground and start beating on her, apparently for no reason, completely unprovoked. And she turns around and she gives him a 4. And she was smaller than him, but she was fiercer too. And the point of the clip, as it was presented on social media, was, always punch back and give him hell, or something like that, was what the comment was on the tweet. But what drew my attention was the fact that, as a bystander, you had a kid, a man, a male, a boy, who was bigger than the assailant, who was standing by and just watching it happen. And then there was a girl nearby as well who had her phone out, taping it. And then, of course, the perspective of the video, obviously that implies there's somebody behind it, another phone sitting there taping it. And so when you talk about the education system and the impact that it has on the fabric of our culture, that's a pretty big red flag. I remember there was another clip that I saw some time ago. It was from like a Russian classroom, and a student got up and made like a threatening gesture, not even an actual assault, but like a threatening gesture to the teacher. And every other boy in the classroom popped up and pinned him to the ground. Like immediately. That was their instinctive reaction. Their reaction was, get that kid back in line. Now, I mean, you can analyze, and it'd probably be a fascinating exercise to analyze the factors that played into the differences there in culture, and which of those differences are good and which of those differences are bad. But I think certainly your premise that the education system plays a role in driving us to a point of apathy, where we lose feeling for each other, but then also what we're talking about here regarding other people as despicable. Now, now that I've given you all that that detail, let me give you a little bit more context that really puts it into perspective. The girl who was jumped was white. The boy who jumped her was black. The guy standing by, who was bigger and could have easily stopped it and protected that girl, was an Asian kid. And so you introduce the racial dynamics, and it raises the question, is part of the reason why this big Asian bystander didn't intervene because he knows what the potential consequences are of laying hands on a black student. Did that play a factor? And if it did, then that most certainly goes back to the ideology that's being promoted by the education system in the form of all this critical race theory nonsense. Go ahead, 19.
Yeah, I agree. I just wanted to, focus it down into you like that guy yesterday that that started attacking you, that took control of the space, the attacks that we constantly see, coming from the left, off of the the mainstream media, and just the ridiculous comments. But the source of those, I think, if we focus our efforts on the source, and going back to the education system, you've seen my, some of my posts towards you and towards, the general, conservative group here in Minnesota about the education system numbers. And I feel like I'm the only one that puts up that pie chart. I feel like I'm the only one that talks about the biennium budget. I feel like I'm the only one that sits there and says, why the hell are we spending 46%, now $15 billion a year, other than the Center of the American Experiments and Bill Glenn? I feel like I'm the only one that talks about that, and I want to see more of a fight from our Republican group. I mean, is it because nobody knows those numbers? Is it? I can go through my neighborhood and I can tell you 8 out of 10 people don't know those numbers, and it just shocks me. And I'd like your comment on that, on why such a glaring bias to spend on our tax dollars isn't the number one subject and the number one target that we attack as Republicans and conservatives towards these leftist lunatics that are teaching our kids.
Not to mention, 19, the statistics when it comes to performance inside of schools, with that amount of money being spent is, I mean, it's absolutely atrocious, right? I mean, we're looking at that. I think of last numbers, it was just shy of half of Minnesota kids are not competent in reading and writing. They're not fluent in reading and was it reading or in mathematics, something like that. I've saw so many reports of the amount of spending that we're doing, but between 40 and 50% of the kids are underperforming in Minnesota.
That's right.
By record amount of spending.
We've dropped, double digit in place and ranking throughout the United States, but there's nothing but crickets coming from, the minority leader, coming from a lot of people. And Walter, I want to hear more from you on this subject, or I'm going to keep coming after you on it, because I'm telling you, this is their Achilles heel, and I strongly believe, when you look at that Feeding Our Future scandal, which is tied to the education system, feeding kids and all that money laundering, you follow the money, you go back to that natural instinct. 50% almost of our tax dollars is a big bucket of money that can be spun around and kicked back and turned into a profit center for these criminals like Tim Walz. And nobody's talking about it, and it really disappoints me.
Well, I can't discount your perspective or how you feel, but from my perspective, we're talking about it all the time. I mean, that's one of our number one top issues is education and the maladministration of it, and the fact that, especially in this past biennium, this kind of bait and switch that they pulled, where they gave this quote unquote historic funding, made it rain on, I won't even say on the schools, because we really didn't even get to the schools, on the districts. They gave the districts money, but they also gave them 65 plus new mandates of how to spend that money. So the analogy that I like to use for this is, it's like if you go to your boss and you hit him up for a raise, And instead of him giving you that raise, he just hands you a handful of gift cards to a bunch of stores that you don't shop at. That's what it's like. It's like, I asked you for more money so that I can use it as I see fit to meet my needs as I perceive them. And you gave me something that I can only spend at a place that I don't need to go to and don't care to go to. That's where the situation that all these school districts find themselves in right now. And we've been talking about that. Leader Dameth has been talking about that. Now, I think, and again, that's not to discount your complaint at all, because it is, if you're not hearing it, then the complaint that you're not hearing it is valid and means that we need to find ways to get it in front of more people. And that would be my focus. I see my honored colleague, Representative Marion Rarick, has joined us as a speaker, and I'd be very interested in hearing from you, Marion, on any of this stuff, but I imagine what prompted you to come up was the last comment.
Yeah, thank you, Walter. So I'm State Representative Marion Rarick. My husband is State Senator Jason Rarick, and he happens to be the Republican lead in the Senate on education, and I am the Republican lead on higher education. So let me just correct a few things to put it in the proper perspective, because I am a numbers and a fact hawk. And so when I heard 47% of our general fund budget was spent on education, I knew that that was not correct. I've watched the state budget for 12 years. I'm on the Ways and Means Committee, which is the highest ranking committee that we deal with all the budget. So let me just lay this out there. So you had said $15 billion was being spent from the general fund budget. I'm assuming you meant general fund on education, which is probably about accurate. But you have to understand that our entire general fund budget, not the all funds budget, that's different, but the general fund budget is $72 billion. So 15 of 72 certainly is not 47%. But let me add something to it, because you're missing a big portion. About $4.4 billion is spent on higher education. And it's basically three buckets. So you spend money on MnState, not MnSCU. We haven't called it MnSCU in a long time. One bucket is for MnState, one bucket is for the University of Minnesota, because they are a land grant institution, and we have a stewardship responsibility. Then the third bucket is through OHE, which is the Office of Higher Education, which goes primarily, but not exclusively, to the state grant program, which follows the student to where they want to go. So again, that is about $4.4 billion. I don't know the exact number for K-12 education. It's probably around 15 billion, like you had said. But even if we counted all of that together, that's 20 billion of 72, which is about 28%. Now, what you didn't say is if you're counting kind of all of the money, all the tax money, which of course, quite a bit of tax money is raised locally. So through levies and other things that happen at the school district level. Even if you add all of that together, we are still not at 46 or 47%. Now, not to discount that we are spending a lot of money, we certainly are. But the biggest bucket of where we spend money is actually health and human services, by far. And that's literally everything from funding our nursing homes to people that are severely disabled to do group homes and everything in between. So just, it's a big, huge, massive bucket of spending. And that's actually our fastest growing bucket as well. It may or may not have something to do with some of the fraud, but we should put this in the proper perspective. So maybe, now I have said from the higher education realm, and my husband has said from the K-12 realm, that we are still spending an awful lot of money, whether it's 28%, probably more an accurate number of our general fund budget. I don't know what the all funds budget is, because to be quite honest, the budget just grew exponentially under the trifecta, under the last biennium. So I don't have those numbers in front of me, but this is just spitballing, from my couch here in my home. But those are numbers I do know. But I'm certain that we are not at 47%. We do spend a lot of money, but not 47%. So I just wanted to put that out there. Again, I'm the lead on the higher ed committee. been there 12 years. My husband is the lead on the education committee, K-12 committee, and I do serve on the Ways and Means Committee, which hears every single bill that spends more than $3,000. And we do budget resolutions, which is the totality of spending. And I do pay a lot of attention to that. So Walter, I just wanted to put that out there, because if we're going to talk about this, we should talk about facts and be accurate, because I know Republicans in general really like to be factual and accurate. So I thought I'd add that to the conversation.
Very much appreciated, Representative Rarick. 19, I'm going to let you close this out. I like to try to keep these things brief in the morning so that I can get off to do my other work for the day. And I'm sure a lot of you have things to do as well, but go ahead, 19, and close this out.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. You know, the accuracy in the numbers. You know, I don't attest to you know, being that informed and to that degree, but I appreciate you know, the response. You know, I think it's a conversation that we should probably continue to have in this space next week and continue on, because again, I just feel like I'm the only one talking about it. I don't get any responses back from people when I start going after the education system, and I start throwing my classic pie chart out that talks about the general fund and the 46% when you look at the categories that are inside that general fund. I don't know if the 20 billion that you talked about is a biennium number, or because when I talked about 15 billion, that was an annual number, or 30 billion biennium for education out of the general fund. So, but you know, whatever that is, I think the point that's being made here is that not enough people know the right numbers. And again, I can walk around into my neighborhood. I can go anywhere I want to, and I can ask people, do you know how much money we spend on education in this town? And the majority of them say they don't. And so I think we need to keep talking about it. And I thank you guys for helping me out.
Thank you all again, and we will see you tomorrow. Well, actually, not tomorrow, because today's Friday. So Monday, I'll be back on at 9 a.m. to do Ask a Republican. Appreciate you coming on.
Walter, I shot you a direct message.
I did see it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you.